This week on Inevitable,
We get roped into watching more classic sci-fi,
Chris Boucher shows off his Western movie chops.
and our main character solves the crime off-screen.
Hello, I'm Dylan.
And I'm Keon.
And this is Inevitable, a classic science fiction podcast. So I guess we should explain a little bit about how Inevitable is going to work. Although
Format-wise.
Format-wise. Although I think if you've listened to either Trust Your Doctor or Zenith, whichever of the two you're coming to this from, you're probably familiar with the general format we're going to be following. If you haven't listened to Trust Your Doctor, then this is probably going to be beneficial to you, since we're probably going to be matching that format a little closer.
Right.
Since I think both of us think that that's a format that we finally hit on as like solid.
Sure, yeah. We usually start with like some production behind the scenes info. They're definitely, depending on what show it is, there's definitely going to be more comprehensive sources of behind the scenes and production stuff out there. Either, just in podcast form possibly, or just on the internet. But I think we'll just be pulling stuff that we find interesting, or that is, the most noteworthy stuff of behind the scenes. And we'll be explaining that right off the bat.
Right. If it exists, of course. If there's nothing, then we'd usually just skip that segment without even mentioning it. Then we usually go into a kind of plot summary with... we usually designate a couple points either within the episode or at the end of the episode to do any discussion. This is the analytical part of the podcast, and those are usually denoted. We'll stop the summary and be like, okay, I wanted to talk about this, or this is where we wanted to talk about X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, our summaries are also very freeform. They're not scripted. We have a general outline that we are going to be following, but other than that, we kind of just wing the summaries.
Right, but like Keon said, we do have outlines, so we do try to at least get the plot summary mostly right, because I think that is a little bit integral to the vague analysis we do. Sure,
yeah, and we don't get too analytical. We try and keep it lighthearted, fun types. Not that analysis isn't fun, but
it could be.
Yeah, no, I think it is. But we typically, I don't think, go too deep, but we try and keep it interesting.
Yeah, I think the main kind of thing to keep in mind with our podcast is that we try to keep it interesting and fun first and foremost. Content is obviously a part of that. We crack a lot of jokes. Even our analysis, typically, we crack a lot of jokes within that, just because I think humor is fun. This will be, although if you are coming from Zenith, this might be a little bit of a change, since it's a little more explicitly analytical than Zenith was, because I know Zenith wasn't intended to be analytical until we got into the whole what is science fiction
debacle discussion.
I don't want to say debate,
discussion,
because it wasn't really a debate, but yeah, discussion. And then from that point on, I think there was a lot more, strictly speaking, analysis than before. But it should be interesting. I know I'm trying to talk about a lot of different things in relation to the episodes every week. That's usually my goal on Trust Your Doctors, to try to bring in something different every week to talk about. And
then we have a couple more, once we finish kind of explaining the plot and the meat of what we wanted to talk about, we had a couple more segments. One called Britain Has 10 Actors, and How Many of Them Are in This?
Yeah, how many of Britain's 10 actors are in this episode or show or whatever it is that week. And then usually following that segment, we'll do the quotes, I think.
Right. But just to kind of explain that segment, we'll just be, I guess, touching on some of the actors in this and some of the other stuff that they've been in, particularly if it's sci-fi, fantasy related.
Right. If they've been in anything notable other than whatever we're watching. Because obviously it's notable that they're in whatever we're watching.
Yeah.
But we want to expand outward beyond that.
Right. That's also... I hope that title doesn't sound too mean-spirited, by the way, but that's been a running joke on our Doctor Who podcast and Blake 7 podcast of Britain, a lot of these actors are reused.
Yeah, I think it's funny because we've obviously watched two different shows from the exact same era of British television, so obviously a lot of the actors would cross over between them, and then we kind of just turned that into a joke that Britain's only got 10 actors. Obviously, it's not supposed to be serious. I think if we make it clear it's a joke, I think hopefully people will recognize it's not supposed to be mean-spirited.
Sure. Also, there's something of Doctor Who DNA in Blake 7, so there's
Right.
that too. And perhaps Star Cops.
We'll see. Something to talk about. From there, we'll move into the quotes section, probably.
Right. Just interesting quotes from the episode, or ones that we thought were funny, or
Noted
like
down.
cool, like one-liners.
Yeah, that's yeah. And then we may or may not have a segment after that. If we decide to in the episode, then we'll mention it.
Free form, baby.
It's kind of the freeform segment. In Zenith, this would be the "What would Blake do?" or "How would Terry Nation write this story?" segment, where it's something pertinent to the show specifically,
Right.
that we talk about. For the first episode of Inevitable, we're thinking of doing something like, what Hollywood movies did Chris Boucher reference this episode? But that may or may not continue. That's kind of just the one downside of this being the first watch through for the show for us, is that we don't really know going in if that's something that'll continue.
Yeah, that's another thing that I think we neglected to say up until now, is that for most of these shows, we haven't watched anything from them.
Right.
I've watched 3 episodes of Star Cops, and beyond that, nothing. And I've watched all of Children of the Stones. But beyond that, it's like this is our first watch through of all of these shows.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that sets us out from other podcasts a lot of the time, is that they're like returning fans who are watching the show for the second, third, fourth time.
Which is definitely interesting, and they definitely have
a place.
A place and like huge insight on some of these shows.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, Spacefall for Blake 7 is a hugely like interesting podcast just because of how much insight they have on the show, having rewatched it so much.
Yeah, Flight Through Entirety, they've watched Doctor Who dozens of times between them, and they always have interesting things and insight to talk about every week because of that. And then once we have that, if we have any emails, we'll respond to those.
Which hopefully we will. Fingers crossed.
We do. Yeah, we do respond to emails on the podcast unless you ask us not to.
And we are watching these live as they go out, well, live, quote unquote, as they go out, and typically haven't watched the next episode by the time you're hearing the podcast. So,
well, maybe just the next episode,
just-
because we record 1 week in advance. So.
Yeah.
And then we'll go into the little ending spiel where we'll advertise ourselves, and then the episode will be over.
You'll be free. No.
That's the structure of that's going to be the structure of Inevitable,
Right.
at least for season 1. I guess part of the benefit. Well, I say that because part of the benefit of this being seasonal is that if we want to change it from season to season, we can.
Yeah, true.
And so this week we watched an Instinct for Murder, episode 1 of Star Cops, 1 of 9, I believe.
Yeah, written by Chris Boucher.
Directed by Christopher Baker.
And aired on July 6th, 1987.
Yeah, so as we explained, we're doing Star Cops.
Yeah.
There's literally no surprises here.
Yeah, so let's just jump in right into the production of this first and only season of Star Cops. Big Finish has actually picked up the rights to Star Cops.
Big Finish basically owns British science fiction at this point.
And they're doing a damn good job most of the time.
They own Space 1999 now as well.
And Blake's the most important one is that they own Blake 7.
Well, and Doctor Who, that they literally built their company on.
But yeah, so the production, I guess, of this first and only season of Star Cops, this is the brainchild of Chris Boucher. Much as Blake 7 was the brainchild of Terry Nation with a lot of input from Chris Boucher, this is the brainchild of Chris Boucher with no input at all from Terry Nation, but a lot of possibly negative input from others. So Chris Boucher actually pitched the idea for Star Cops for radio in the early 80s, but it was deemed unnecessary. There was I forget what, like, I think a BBC response, BBC, I guess, as a whole, or some people from BBC responded, like, there's enough sci-fi for, like, the blocks that we're looking at for Star Cops. So no. So he eventually pitched it to TV. And he left the show that he was currently working on at the time, Bergerac, which I've heard of but never seen. I don't really know what it's about.
It's kind of weird that we've come full circle. That was originally pitched for radio, and now we're getting audio dramas from Big Finish.
Yeah. Chris Boucher had to leave Bergerac to work on Star Cops, to create Star Cops. But even right off the bat, right from the beginning, there was a lot of tension behind the scenes. I think the initial maybe warning sign for Chris Boucher was that this episode, the first episode, An Instinct for Murder, Chris, as if we know each other, wanted to be a two-parter, but obviously that ended up not happening. But of course, once the producer for the show, I'm probably going to pronounce his name wrong, Evgeny Gridnev, was brought on board, he and Chris Boucher butted heads a lot and did not have a cohesive vision for the show, so much that in retrospect, I believe Chris Boucher, I think this is coming from the DVD commentaries of Star Cops, was like, I should have just volunteered to produce the show myself. Not sure how much the BBC would have liked that, considering how many regulations they have about that kind of thing. But I think in retrospect, he wanted his own vision to come across on screen, which it didn't.
That's fair. Looking at Evgeny's name, if it's French, then the G is probably silent, so it's probably Evgeny. If it's French, I don't know.
It was Russian.
If it's Russian, then it's probably Evgeny? I don't know. I don't know anything about Russian. I only know French. Took 3 years of French. It's interesting that he kind of felt like his vision never came through, since I find it interesting as kind of a reversal to Blake 7, where Terry Nation wrote every episode, and like Series A was like definitely Terry Nation's vision, but then it basically became Chris Boucher's show starting in Series B, but like from Series C onwards, it feels like it's very much just Chris Boucher's show at that point. So it's I guess interesting that he's like now experiencing that from the other side, and is like, man, that sucks. Or I guess this came out before Blake 7, so the other way around.
No, this came after.
Was it after?
Yeah, 87. So about 10 years after.
Yeah, that would be after. So it's interesting. He's experiencing it from the other way around now, and he's like, damn, this sucks.
maybe there's
like
some of that.
The other side now, and he's like, damn.
Well, I was actually, when we watched Blake 7, and I don't want to harp too much on our Blake 7 podcast, Zenith, please check it out. But I remember, like, even in Terry Nation's season, even in Series A, like, episodes like Mission to Destiny, I was shocked, like, that Terry Nation wrote that, because that had all the Chris Boucher elements. That was like Robots of Death without the robots, without all the Doctor Who stuff. Like, that episode was so Chris Boucher.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, maybe he's sort of experiencing this from the other side, because I think one thing that Gridneff asked Boucher to do right off the bat is rewrite every single script that he'd written. Chris Boucher, like Terry Nation, wanted to write every episode of Star Cops. He ended up, I believe, only writing 5 episodes total out of the 9.
Yeah, it may even be that they didn't let him do that because they saw how Terry Nation burned himself out doing that. They didn't want the same thing to happen. I guess also the difference is that Terry Nation never like felt opposed to Chris Boucher injecting his vision into Blake 7. As far as I know, there was never like any open hostility or even like friction between the two. It always seemed like, from my understanding, that they were very much on the same page with that. Whereas here, to my understanding, Chris Boucher was very much at odds with like basically everyone telling him how to make his show.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, Nation even said to Boucher, like, hey, like, I don't have enough time to finish these drafts, so you're either getting first drafts or essentially he asked him, I think, to rewrite his episodes, essentially, is what it amounted to. But I think a big straw that inevitably did break the camel's back, maybe not the last one, was that, this is back in the day of videotape versus film. And one like idea that I think is kind of brilliant that Boucher had for this show was that all the Earth scenes would be on film and all the space scenes would be on tape to kind of mask the difference, the jarring difference that you get in shows like Doctor Who, where it's like, okay, all of a sudden now this is on tape and before it was on film, or vice versa. But Gridneff just nixed that idea. He decided it would all be on tape. And Boucher did not like that at all.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand where he's coming from. On the other hand, you're watching a 360p television. Would you have actually been able to tell the difference?
Or sub 360.
Yeah, would you have actually been able to tell the difference as an audience member?
I think at the time, maybe TV like buffs at the time would be like, okay, this one's film, this is video. But most audience members, I don't think, would really care.
Like even like for us when we watched Invasion of the Dinosaurs, I think it was, which was the third Doctor story where like a substantial part of it was filmed on, what was it? Or maybe
tape.
It was Spearhead from Space. One of them was like substantially shot on film because they didn't have any videotape, and like I remember when we watched it, I didn't remember noticing anything like drastically different from the episodes surrounding it.
It's not a drastic difference. You can tell though, especially if you're looking out for it. You can definitely tell, and even if you're not, there is like a shift.
I think you could tell now because film scanning technology has like massively improved since the 70s and 80s. I guess my question is still just like in the 80s specifically, would you have been able to tell? And I genuinely don't know.
Me neither. We'd have to ask one of the like 3 people who actually tuned in. But anyway, this series was envisioned as a very near future, fairly realistic show. So they actually brought NASA advisors and other people who worked in the space industry, I guess you could say, to do some advising on the show. I don't know if that comes across on screen. I know there have been some people, reviewers, I guess, or just people online posting impressions who were very critical about some of the special effects work in Star Cops, especially in this episode. Because this episode, the first episode, surprisingly enough, is, I read, the second lowest budget episode of the show.
I'll tell you, as someone who's in astrophysics, I was like massively impressed by the special effects in this episode, actually. I went into it expecting the special effects to be like terrible because I always heard from everyone, it's like, Star Cop has got such a low budget, everything just looks terrible. And I went in and I was watching it and I was like, I'm actually like massively impressed by this.
That might be like the result of that, like people saying like this looks really bad and then it doesn't actually look as bad as they remembered, or they're just exaggerating, or we thought it would be worse. And
maybe, but like just seeing the people like quote floating unquote, I was actually genuinely curious. Like, how did they do this? Like, how did they make it look like they were actually floating? Because obviously they didn't have the budget to put them in an airplane and film it in an airplane, which is like mostly how they do it nowadays.
Yeah, I have no idea how they achieved it, but I do know that was one of the things they brought some of these space industry or aerospace people in for, was the floating stuff to make it look more realistic.
The one time I was like, okay, this is a little bit sketchy, was there's a clipboard that was like floating around with them, and the clipboard you could kind of tell was just like on a piece of fishing wire. But still, that didn't bother me because I was like, seeing the people float was like, how did they do that?
Yeah, no, I really like the special effects in this episode. I think this episode actually looks great, and I'll just say this now since we're on the topic. There are people who are critical of this episode as a whole, not just the special effects. There are people who think this is even people who like Star Cops, I've read, say this is a bad episode, and I just don't think so. I think this is a good episode.
I didn't think it was a great episode. I didn't think it was a bad episode either, though. I think it was like solidly mediocre in my opinion.
Wow.
Which isn't bad.
Yeah, just bad. Like a 3 out of 5, like exact.
Yeah, basically.
Average.
Basically.
If you don't already know, and by that I mean if you haven't listened to our other podcasts, I don't like numerical ratings, by the way. And we don't do ratings on any of our episodes.
Yeah.
Other than like joke ones.
Or we do general impressions. Like, I think this was good, or bad, or mediocre.
Anyway, the music in Star Cops is very iconic, perhaps infamous. It's composed by Justin Hayward of the Moody Blues, which is why it sounds like that. I love it. I think it's great.
I think it was decent.
I love that intro. We're going to get into this, but that 3-minute intro where you hear the full theme, I love that. And the people are getting killed, that's the best part of this episode, in my opinion. I love that 3-minute intro so much.
We're going to get to that extremely shortly here. Anyway, Star Cops got extremely bad viewership.
Viewership. I think the total was 1.2 million, which sounds like a lot, but apparently for its time slot was not very much on the BBC.
Yeah, there was a planned 10th episode. I remember reading that never got filmed just because the reception was so low, and industrial actions and the budget and just all behind the scenes stuff. So it just got canceled after 9 episodes.
And what's his name? What was it? Eric Ray Evans, who plays Theroux, getting chicken pox.
Yeah, that sucks. I've had chicken pox, and that sucks.
There was also a lot of shuffling in the order of episodes in the final half of the season because of the cancellation of the last one, I believe. So some say the show never got its due, or some say that the behind-the-scenes conflict and the lack of cohesive vision, all amounted to Star Cops not living up to what it could have been. And I think Chris Boucher is definitely in that camp because he, looking back, just in interviews or in the DVD commentary or whatever, he's like, I'm unhappy with how Star Cops turned out as a whole. He didn't like Justin Hayward's soundtrack either.
Maybe it was just ahead of its time.
Maybe. There's definitely a resurgence now with Big Finish picking up the audios. And
I think there's just been a resurgence in like near future sci-fi now. And I feel like this show would have been, if it had been made now, would have been like instantly just applauded and popular. I mean, because starting with Interstellar, we've had like this just string of like near future sci-fi. We had Interstellar, we got The Martian, Ad Astra, First Man, which was a biopic about Neil Armstrong. Like all of these have been like super popular.
Sure. I don't know if you...
Maybe not Ad Astra.
I don't know if I would group Interstellar as part... That's near future, but it's like a little further than I would say Star Cops.
Yeah, but I think it started this resurgence of near future sci-fi.
Yeah, maybe.
Because Interstellar was very grounded in real science, which was...
Well, you can have a show that takes place in 3019 that's grounded in real science.
Of course, but it wasn't the norm, I guess, in movies at the time until Interstellar came out. And then a lot of people were like, we should make like grounded near future sci-fi.
Because Interstellar made tons of money.
It did. And yeah.
So it could be part of the bandwagon.
Arrival as well. Arrival was another one.
Arrival was lame.
It's near future sci-fi though.
It was lame as hell.
I really liked it.
Oh, not Arrival. I was thinking of I always forget the name. What's the one where like there's a beam of light and there's some weird animals inside? It starts with an A, I believe. It's like this woman goes into this area that's like corrupted by an alien presence.
Oh, you're thinking of Annihilation.
Annihilation. That was lame.
It was all right.
Arrival seems really cool. I haven't watched Arrival, but it seems
Arrival is fantastic. I think you specifically would love it.
That's what I've been told by like multiple people. Like you specifically would love it.
Yeah, you would. Because it has to do a lot with like linguistics and how people understand language. Yeah. So
I've seen some clips from it. Anyway, not only were the ratings low, but I believe the reception at the time was not great. I think I was kind of just skimming some stuff people wrote at the time, supposedly from 87, of like, if you want to tune into Star Cops, you're going to have to want to watch Star Cops to tune in at this time. It's not just like... And that was the thing of... it was actually Gridneff's idea to bring in Justin Hayward of the Moody Blues to do the music, to rope in viewers. I don't know how much that worked. I think it actually turned people off, especially because the first thing you see in this episode is that 3-minute song with the people getting killed, which, like, if you're watching Star Cops for the first time and you don't know what it is, and it wasn't like a recommendation thing, and you didn't want to like, and you were just kind of testing the water, seeing what it is, like, you see that 3-minute intro, maybe you just turn it off right then and there.
Right. I'm just looking up what else, like, what Gridneff was involved in, because I'm curious to know if this was like it was normal for him to be so involved in his television shows, or if it was just like Star Cops. He just had like a vendetta against Star Cops specifically.
Well, the thing about the behind the scenes of Star Cops is that it seems very much like there was no cohesive vision for the show. So Chris Boucher had his own vision, which was the genesis of the show. And then Gridneff obviously had his own ideas. But then even when we get into the two directors of the show, Christopher Baker and Graham Harper, they each came at the show from very different angles, I think. So there was just no real cohesive vision behind anything.
Interestingly, according to IMDb, this was like the last show that Gridneff acted as producer on.
Huh.
Beyond this, he acted as a script consultant on a TV show called The House of Elliot, and then he wrote some scripts for The House of Elliot, and then that was basically the last thing he did.
Huh? Maybe he overstepped his bounds a little bit with Star Cops. I don't know.
Possibly. IMDb says he's known for Star Cops, so...
Huh? Yeah, I'd never heard of him before this.
Interesting.
And also just keep in mind that kind of this entire backstory or making of stuff is mostly from Wikipedia. I took a little here and there from other sites, blogs and stuff that I found are like people who had transcribed some DVD commentary, but mostly it's from Wikipedia, and I didn't check the sources.
So take it with a grain of salt, is what you're saying.
Yep. I think this is just like the general consensus of how Star Cops was made. But I mean, as accounts such as Making Blake 7, the Making Blake 7 Twitter account, show things that are thought to be general consensus or have become like fan canon over the years are actually maybe
Could
not
be wrong, yeah.
true.
Well, on the topic of the intro, because I guess this is where we're going now, is the intro.
Yeah.
It reminded me a lot of Star Trek Enterprise, which was a TV show in 2001, I want to say it was, or 2002. And there's actually, listening to the production information, there's a lot of similarities between Star Cops and Star Trek Enterprise, which I feel like I'm going to be bringing up a lot more throughout the course of this podcast. But Enterprise was the first Star Trek series to have a vocal song as its intro theme, and people hated it because it was like, Star Trek, we only have like non-vocal songs, even though Gene Roddenberry wrote lyrics for the original theme. They just never got used.
Horrific flashbacks to the time we thought about recording Distant Star.
But I don't have a problem with this intro being a vocal song. I don't even have a problem with the song itself. I think it's fine. I know for me personally, though, my problem was that it's 3 bloody minutes long.
It's glorious.
If it was like a minute and a half, maybe pushing it to 2 minutes, I'd have been like, cool, awesome. But 3 minutes, like once you hit that 2 minute mark, for me, it started to feel a little bit like a slog.
Well, you're in luck because this is the only episode that actually plays the full thing. The rest of the episodes play like a cut version that's like 30 seconds or a minute.
Well, that's good, because it almost feels like they tacked on a music video in front of the episode.
Essentially, yeah. It's all playing while you see a montage of people getting killed. So a guy goes swimming in a lake, a very tight Speedo.
I was not paying that much attention.
So he jumps in this lake. It looks cold as heck, and he gets killed.
Well, when I was watching this, because then it transitions immediately into the episode with investigating this guy die, and I'm like, oh man, what would be really cool is if in every intro, the guy who gets killed that week gets killed in the intro song. And I was like, that would actually be really cool.
No. That would be really cool, but no. But don't forget, we also see a guy in space get killed by 2 people. The first time I watched this, because I'll just say I've watched the first 3 episodes already, so this is my second watch. The first time I watched this, I was a little confused. I was like, okay, so are these 2 things happening at the same time? Or is this like the same crew who killed the guy at the lake and is now going to kill people and kill this guy in space? But no, I think it is happening concurrently.
Well, it did immediately hook me in, because I was like, wait, how are these related? And interestingly, that's probably where Chris Boucher had to condense the 2 episodes into one, because probably, if I had to guess, first episode, guy in the lake dies. Second episode, guy in space dies.
Yeah, that's interesting that you bring that up, because I was thinking about that, and I was actually thinking that the condensation was that, or was in the form of like, because I imagined Chris Boucher was like, all right, episode 1 is going to set up the characters, and episode 2 is going to dive deeper into this mystery. Mm-hmm. But once that was condensed into one, we got what we got, which was mostly a dive into like setting up the characters, and the mystery is a little bit backseated in this. Mm-hmm. Almost like it was in episode 1 of Blake 7, where it's like you cut to the lawyer and the girlfriend going on their own little journey in a way.
Yeah, and those characters just like never show up again.
Yeah, they get killed, if I remember correctly.
It's interesting to think about where the split between the 2 episodes is, and where they got condensed into one. Because I thought this episode was going to focus on this lake death, and that we were going to learn about the investigator through the lake death, and then he would be sent to space as like a promotion, which kind of happens against his will.
No, but even the space death is not too big of a focus, more so than the lake for sure. But even then, I feel that this episode is mostly concerned with setting up Nathan Spring and even Theroux, and even though Theroux is just seemingly here in this as
David.
All right, David. Fine, I'll call him David. Whatever.
Well, Nathan calls him David, so I legitimately didn't even know his name was Theroux because Nathan just calls him David.
It's David Henry Thoreau. He didn't go out into Walden. He went to space.
Well, what I want to bring up here is just briefly. Did you notice the like kind of weird, casual, racist line that one of these characters just throws down here?
Wait, what?
Well, one of the guys dies, and then David is talking to
Stevenson,
the one who betrays him.
Yeah, Stevenson. I had to look up his name.
And Stevenson says something like, he wasn't a bad bloke for an Italian.
Oh, right.
And I'm like, wait, what? What?
Yeah, I do remember that, actually. Well, right off the bat, that clues you in that this is a multinational space station.
It does do that, but it also made me go, wait, what?
Yeah.
You kind of get that a little bit more because I think either David or Stevenson has an American flag patch on their sleeve, and the other one has like a
Stevenson has the
Union
British
Jack.
Yeah, has the British flag, and David has the American flag because David, as we find out later, used to belong to the American space program.
Mm-hmm.
We also see another guy later with a Swedish flag. He gets killed, and then of course we have I believe her name is Kezi, who is introduced in this episode, but gets a more proper introduction, I would say, next week, I think. Or maybe it's episode 3, I don't remember.
Oh, is she like the lady who was like in charge?
She was the Australian lady who was like gambling. She's like actually a main character next episode, I think.
My only note on her is that the old lady is pissed.
She's not that old. Maybe she looks a little older than she is.
I think the fact that I was watching a screen of someone filming a screen,
the simulacra,
made her look older than she really is. It's like that whole thing, like the camera adds 10 pounds kind of thing.
Sure. But anyway, now we cut to Earth, to the most late 80s, early 90s investigation like command center you can imagine. Don't you agree?
I loved it though. I love mystery shows, so I was all in at this point. I was like, oh hell yeah. Then there was like less of the actual investigating that I would have liked in this episode, which is maybe why I didn't like it as much as you did.
Office politics. Because we meet our main character, Nathan Spring. Arab Spring. No.
Okay.
No,
okay.
No.
All right, buddy. Whoa.
This does get weirdly political at the end.
That's because I think it's heavily steeped in the Cold War, which is one of the things I want to talk about.
Yeah, same here. So Nathan is investigating the murders. He's a cop. He's not with the Star Cops yet, but he will be.
Well, so they've got this like computer that you can input all the data about a crime scene into, and it'll output like a probability of whether or not it was a murder or just a death. Sorry, I should have said death at first, not murder. And it'll tell you. And Nathan is like, "Damn the computer! Just investigate the damn murder. I know it's a murder."
Yeah, his sort of the guy who's reporting to him, I believe, is named Brian.
Yes,
something like that.
Yes, I believe it was Ryan.
Brian, yeah. Brian. So Brian is like, well, yeah. Brian's like, well, the computer's already basically closed this case for us. And then Nathan's like, he says that line of like, "Damn the computer, I want to know what you think."
Yeah, it is Brian. I actually wrote down his name.
Huh?
The only guy I wrote down his name for, besides Nathan and David, I guess. Does Brian show up again?
I don't remember. I don't think so.
So Nathan gets called into, I guess, I wasn't exactly clear about this guy's job, but I guess he was like head of all of the investigative branches together.
He's just credited as commander, I believe. I don't think he even has a name.
He's like if the FBI and the CIA had like a joint boss above them who controlled both of them, which I guess would be like the Secretary of State. That's his job here. So he controls both Nathan's like ground cops force and then the Star Cops.
Ground cops, is that their new name?
Yeah, the ground cops. This premise is remarkably prescient because I don't know if you heard about this, but I guess it was about 2 months ago now, the first like crime in space was committed.
Oh, what?
And
nice.
And I know like the United States and like England were like, wait, so like how do we prosecute this? Like, what do we do?
Wait, what happened?
I don't remember the specifics anymore, but it was a lady and she she was either blackmailing her ex-girlfriend or she was like embezzling funds from. It was one of those. It was like a white collar crime.
She was doing it from space.
And she was doing it while she was like in space.
You thought you could escape the law in space. You were wrong.
And everyone was like, well, how do we prosecute this? Like, is it international waters, or do we prosecute her as an American because she was American, or like, what do we do about this? And I don't remember what happened. Just launch her into
deep space.
Just float her, as they say on the 100. I can't believe I just made a 100 reference. But so anyway, there's a shuttle that's inbound on Green 2, and it's I guess it's like the replacement crew for the two guys who died at the beginning of the episode.
Well, I think it was just one who died on the space station. I think the guy at the lake was just some rando whose wife decided that he needed to die. Spoilers.
But meanwhile, Nathan's talking with the commander, I guess, and the guy's like, look, I'm going to promote you to Space Cops. You're on the short list. And Nathan's like, whoa.
Star Cops, a.k.a. International Space Police Force.
Yeah, why?
Okay, we find out here that all the Star Cops are part-time. I did not pick that up my first watch through.
Oh, great. So are they, like, here's my question. Are they paid 24/7, like for working 24/7 because they got to work to like keep the space station operating as well as investigating all the murders, or like what?
I think so, because there are multiple references in this episode to the fact that the Star Cops get paid a lot more than Earth Cops.
Well, if they're part-time, would you pay them 24/7 if they're part-time? Because they would like hit their part-time hours pretty quickly if you did that.
Maybe you pay... Yeah, well, that's true. I don't know.
Do they have like separate astronauts who just maintain the space station? Except I don't think so, because the way that like the training Nathan gets and the way David talks to Nathan kind of implies that they're basically maintaining the station as well as investigating crimes.
Yeah, I believe everyone we see on the station is a Star Cop. I don't know if that means that the station doesn't have anyone else on it, but I'm pretty sure everyone we see on the station is wearing that Star Cop's uniform. And then Kezi, was it Kezi or was it Kezi? I don't remember. Kezi? She calls...
I didn't write her name down, though, so I can't help you on that
She
one.
calls specifically about the Star Cops because she wants to join the Star Cops, and she calls that station, so I assume it's like a Star Cop station.
The side of the station says it's Space Station Carl C. Fun fact.
Yeah, that's...
Don't know why I read that.
They say that a couple times in the dialogue as well. But regardless, Nathan doesn't want this new position.
I don't think he even applied for this position, though.
No.
The guy's like, I put your name up, and he's like, why would you do that?
Yeah, he did. We find out why that's the case in a few minutes, actually. But for now, I think we get a little bit on the station. So we're introduced to David Theroux, who is a main character, and Stevenson, who is only a main character in this episode. Mainly because he either dies or like gets arrested at the end.
We don't really know.
We don't know Stevenson's fate.
He kind of just gets kicked in the face, and then we never see what happens to him.
Yeah, the two other guys died though. Nathan killed them. He punctured their suits. Anyway, so Stevenson is new on the station. Theroux is sort of an old hat there. Theroux is a Star Cop.
Mm-hmm.
As is Stevenson, he's wearing a Star Cop uniform, so Stevenson... Stevenson is an air traffic controller, but he's also a Star Cop.
These guys are taking on like 6 jobs. Like, what's their salary?
Maybe that's why Kezi wants in so bad.
Kezi's just busy gambling. She's like, I had to fold 4 hearts or something just to contact you.
Right.
I don't know what game she's playing. Blackjack? Texas Hold'em?
Go fish.
Go fish. High stakes, go fish.
There's something I actually wanted to touch on that I think is going to be recurring for this entire show, is that the dialogue is very snappy and fast, as is typical of Chris Boucher dialogue.
Right.
And it's actually a little bit hard to follow.
Yeah, because it's like... It's like Avon's almost stepping on people's lines level here, but except from every character.
Yeah, during Blake 7, Chris Boucher had the habit of taking whoever wrote the script and injecting his own lines for Avon, or just rewriting Avon's lines, because he and Paul Darrow were pretty good friends.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine if every character had Avon's level of snappiness. No, it almost feels like that. And there were times that I had to, rewind is such an old term nowadays. I can't believe it. There are times that I had to go back in the episode like 15 or 30 seconds and kind of just watch portions again because the dialogue was so fast. And I'm also used to watching everything with subtitles, but this didn't have subtitles available the way I watched it. So, yeah.
You can turn on auto-generated closed captions.
No.
Yeah, it makes it difficult to zone out as well. Like if I alt-tabbed out to go write something in my notes and I was writing something, I would just miss whatever they were saying while I was typing.
This is definitely like if you're writing notes for the show, which we are, pause when you write your notes type of show. But anyway, back on Earth, we see Nathan. He's sort of investigating the scene of the crime, the lake that is, and he's talking to a character named Box, who is the
computer.
He's the computer of the show. We find out later, and I'll just explain this now because it has to do with some behind-the-scenes stuff, but we find out that Box was created by Nathan's father and given to Nathan. Chris Boucher's original vision for Box was that it would talk in Nathan's voice. Now, Box is actually voiced by David Calder, who plays Nathan, but he puts on a particular voice for Box. Chris Boucher wanted him to have the same voice, and then it was probably Gridneff, I believe, who came back and vetoed that for the reason that you wouldn't be able to tell who was talking when he was talking to Box.
Fair,
I guess. But Chris's response to that was like, yeah, exactly. Like that's what I want to be I want it to be confusing. I don't want you to be able to tell who's talking.
But why, Chris?
I don't know. I'm sure we'll find out. Well, I'm not sure actually. I hope we'll find out why that's the case as we get into more of the themes of Star Cops in later episodes, or the themes of this entire season as a whole type thing.
Yeah, that's weird because of something I wanted to talk about in a little bit.
Sure.
And I'll mention it again when we get there.
But we find out Nathan has a date at a Chinese restaurant.
Yeah. Keon mentioned reading my notes where I was like heavily questioning if this was Nathan's wife or not. And at the end, I finally figured out that it was just like a girlfriend or maybe not even that. Maybe somebody just gone on like 2 dates with.
It's his girlfriend. They imply that it's his longtime girlfriend.
Yeah.
And I picked up on this. Obviously, I've watched this twice, and you've only watched it once. So like I have a little more. I picked up on a lot more like watching it the second time. That this was his girlfriend, and that the reason why he didn't want to get the promotion is that they were planning on starting a family on Earth.
Yeah. He doesn't mention that till their like third conversation though, which is when I picked up that it was not his wife, it was his girlfriend. So
a little meta piece of information here is that we learn, I believe it's here, we learn that Nathan is 41 years old. David Calder is also 41 years old at the time.
Easy.
Yep. But they're sort of discussing work.
Yeah, Nathan, I mentioned this in my notes later, but Nathan just gives out like probably classified information about all of his investigations at these dinners.
Yeah, Lee actually mentions that she turned down a promotion in order to, start the family that they want to start. And Nathan is like, yeah, about that, I'm going to be going to an interview for the Star Cops.
I mean, he's kind of in a bad position though, because he didn't even put his name up for this promotion. He's like, I'm just being forced into this. Like if I say no, I don't have a job at all.
Right. And we learn from Box that Lee has always hated this restaurant. We learn from Lee that Lee has always hated this restaurant. And Box
reminds Nathan of that fact.
Right.
I think they're eating
Chinese food badly with chopsticks.
Hey, they're trying. They're trying. Anyway, eventually Nathan makes his way up to space, I guess for his on-site job training.
Yeah, well, he goes through some training.
They're like leading him on spacewalks and showing him what's up. And this is when they kind of indicate to Nathan that the backpacks have been malfunctioning.
Right. During all this, Nathan actually asks Brian to keep investigating the lake because he knows clues are there.
Yeah, because the widow is like not grief-stricken at all, and I was like, okay, wife did it, or husband.
It could
just said the widow, but anyway,
it could just be a big red herring of like,
the wife did it.
I mean, she did in the end. She did, but yeah, they indicate that there's been some malfunctions in the backpacks, which is obviously not true because we saw the guy get killed. But that's what they're sort of playing it off as.
Guess that's what the computer says they are.
Right.
Well, so what I wanted to talk about here was that there seems to be this weird kind of like anti-computer message throughout this whole episode, which is why I think it's weird that Chris Boucher was like, I want them to sound the same, because like through the whole episode, Nathan's like, don't trust the computer, do your own research, like only trust what you see with your own eyes, only trust what you find out for yourself, like don't put it into the computer, don't like report it. And it's like through this whole episode, there's this just like anti-computer, I don't know why I closed my notes, there's this whole anti-computer sentiment, which is again why I find it weird that Chris like didn't want you to be able to tell like who was talking, whether it was Box or Nathan. Also, just the whole conception of Box is like weird when Nathan's like, don't trust the computer, because he does it later in this episode too, where the computer's like, oh, it was just a malfunction in the suit, and Nathan's like, no, it's got to be something more, can't trust the computer.
I think we'll find out more about that entire dynamic as the series goes on. But maybe that's like, Nathan is this guy who doesn't trust computers, yet he is like saddled with Box from his father. He is, or was originally intended to be, indistinguishable himself from a computer.
Maybe that's why he has a distrust of computers, is that maybe his father was trying to replace him with one, and that's why they were going to sound the same. That's like why Chris Boucher wanted to do that. I
forgot a lot about episodes 2 and 3, although I have watched them already. But I think we're going to find out more about this computer, the stuff you're touching on. I think we'll find out more as the season goes on.
Well, yeah, that's just what I wanted to bring up. Yeah. I know you had some stuff you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about the late 80s CG that we see here when he's going into space. Now, I don't know whether this was maybe added on the DVD release or something. I couldn't find any information that said, like, yes, this was added later.
So you don't know if they pulled a George Lucas or not?
No, I don't. So I don't think it was. I think this is just like, hey, let's do some like late 80s CG work. Looks good. I like the shot of the ship.
Yeah, I think it looks great, actually.
Yeah.
Like I said at the beginning of the episode, I think special effects are great in this episode.
I mean, it only has to be on screen for like 2 seconds, so that helps.
Still, though, it looks great.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I just wanted to, at this point, I think, touch on the music, because I think at this point in the episode, we've gotten the gist of like how the music is going to be for the entire show, and I love it. It's very divisive. I know there's a lot of people who hate it, including Chris Boucher, who was like, this music does not fit what I wanted Star Cops to be. But I think it gives it, I'll be the first to tell you that uniqueness is not always a good thing, but I think this gives it like a really unique feel. Like the soundtrack in Star Cops is like no other.
Well, I guess the key is that it works for this. It feels very campy 80s.
I think it actually adds to the near future aesthetic, because like this is music you might imagine that people, I think this takes place, I found actually on a blog post saying this takes place in 2027. I couldn't find any other verification for that. But it feels like something you might listen to in 2027, you know?
Maybe. I feel like in 2027 we'll probably be listening to more Katy Perry and Justin Bieber, for being really honest.
You still think they'll still be around?
Justin Bieber's still around. Just released a song with Ed Sheeran like a month ago, so yeah.
He's been in the game for like, what, 10, 12 years at this point?
Yeah, but he's only like in his mid to late 20s, so...
I mean, that's true. Dang, we're stuck with Justin Bieber for another God know how long.
Paul McCartney's still making music, and he's like in his late 70s to 80s, so Justin Bieber could be around forever.
You know who's still making music? Ringo Starr. He's vastly overlooked these days.
Ringo and his all-star band.
Not that I've listened to anything he's put out. I'm actually very surprised how much I like the intro theme to Star Cops, because... not only do I dislike vocal themes in TV and movies in general, I just dislike vocal music in general.
Well, you might grow to hate it by
Maybe. It won't be easy.
Well, back to the episode, David calls Nathan out on this, and he's like, you think someone's killing people and making it look like suit malfunctions? And Nathan's like, yes.
Well, the reason why he thinks that is because he has this entire theory that whoever's doing this is trying to get the servicing contract away from the Russians, because the Russians have like this monopoly on spacesuit servicing.
Mm-hmm.
So by making it look like their servicing is faulty and is resulting in deaths, whoever's behind this, Stevenson, he's part of it, could potentially have that revoked.
Right. Then Nathan immediately goes to dinner with Lee and spills the beans on the Russian contract and how he thinks that someone's making it look like the Russians. I'm like, Nathan, what are you doing? This is like confidential information. Nathan.
Yeah, I really like this setup they have going on here in this episode. I didn't actually pay too much attention my first watch through, but this time I really enjoyed how like Nathan can go back and forth between space and Earth.
And we never see it on screen. Actually, most of the plot developments of this episode we don't see because they're off screen.
Yeah, and
basically the entirety of Brian's investigation from here on out occurs like off screen.
And again, that's probably the result of condensing this from 2 episodes into 1, possibly. That's speculation on my part, but I think it sounds right.
And we all know that if it sounds right,
then it is.
Probably is right.
And I just like the how there's potential for, and this is something we talk about with Doctor Who as well, and weirdly enough, also for Blake 7 with the more like sitcom-y scenes of like, there's this dynamic between the sci-fi stuff and then like the family drama like with Lee and stuff.
Right. Don't think there's going to be sitcom-y elements in Chris Boucher's snappy dialogue, though.
No.
My next note just says Nathan back to space. I think I forgot to write goes in there.
Yeah, Nathan goes back to space, goes back to the station. And at this point, you know, he decides to have he decides actually to have a box run a scan on everyone on the station and see if there are any suspicious people or people with ties to like, I think he says extreme like right-wing groups.
Yeah, remarkably prescient as well.
Box says it's going to be a long and
unreliable
process, to which Nathan responds, well, Box, life usually is. As part of this plan, Nathan also decides to go out into space, cordless.
Well, that's like apparently part of his like the capstone to his training is that he has to do that. And David's like, you should have been like on the medication for weeks before you do this. And Nathan's like, we have no time.
I think he also wanted to potentially lure out the killers.
Oh yeah, the space gang, as I wrote here.
Is that what does he say? Does he call them the space gang?
I just call them space gang. I wrote, oh shit, space gang. Because while he's in space, you just see 3 people float in from off screen. It's like,
they're
tough guy finger snapping.
I know, they're just like snap. Like, what's West Side Story? They like walk in, snap. Turns out you can hear people snap in space.
West Side Space Story. But yeah, they just float in from off screen. You're like, oh no, Nathan.
Theroux sees this on the monitors, and Stevenson pulls a gun on him.
Yeah, because David's like, how could you not have seen this all the previous times unless you were in on it and you did see them all the previous times? And then Stevenson's like, you got me. Stevenson just rolls over. He could have like played it off like, no, well, maybe the monitor wasn't. Stevenson just goes all in at this point. He's like, I got a gun.
Yeah, he has a gun, so that definitely helps.
Well, David's like, you can't use that in here. And he's like, yeah, I can. Low muzzle velocity. And he's like, are you sure about that? And Stevens is like, what have I got to lose? And I'm like, wow, you're really going all in on this.
Well, he explains his like mustache twirling evil villain personality because he's like, I just joined this organization for the money at first, but once people started dying, I realized I didn't care and in fact actually enjoyed it.
I guess they get paid pretty well then if he just joined for the money.
I think he's talking about joining the criminal
unless he's talking about the
organization.
bribes they're giving him.
Yeah. he actually organized the death at the lake as well, which is revealed. Actually, it's revealed later.
Well, he takes David into the airlock, I guess, because he's like, "You're gonna go try save Nathan and then die in like a tragic accident." And
this was actually a bit funny.
This was hilarious. Not a bit funny. This is hilarious. One of the spacesuits you think is empty just like karate kicks Stevenson in the face. And David's like, "What are you doing in here?" And he's like, "I took them both out with a medical laser."
Yeah, so Nathan punctures the guy's suits, killing them.
And I'm like, why didn't we get to see that?
Yeah, this happens off screen somewhat disappointingly, I would say.
I'd say very disappointingly.
I like this entire sequence, especially with the soundtrack playing, is great. I love how it all like culminates in this. I guess it would have been a little better if the death at the lake was somehow more related than it was, but overall, I love this entire sequence of like, oh no, who is it? And then Stevenson pulls the gun, and you're like, oh no, it's him.
Yeah, but then Nathan goes down to meet the commander, and he basically just like explains the rest of the plot because I guess Chris Boucher realized they were out of time. He basically just goes, "Oh yeah, Russia executed the person they had giving bribes, so they're dead."
Right, because
Brian solved the murder.
We heard in a very odd scene, actually when Nathan and Lee are at the restaurant the second time, one of the people working at the restaurant just wheels in a little TV for Nathan to watch and then wheels it out in a very odd.
Nathan actually like explicitly calls it over. He's like, "I guess this conversation's done with Lee." He's like, "Waiter, please, TV."
Oh, really? I didn't notice that he said that.
Well, he doesn't ask for a TV, but he's like, "Hey, waiter, can you bring that over here?"
And on that broadcast, we get that the Russians are persecuting the person responsible for maintenance checks on the suits that gave out, quote unquote, gave out. And we learn that at the end here that that person was probably killed.
Actually, speaking of that TV, I should mention one of my problems with this episode is the goddamn sound editing.
Yeah.
Because every time a TV was on screen, they played the TV volume and the people in the scene volume at the same volume. So it just kind of sounded like a room full of people talking. You're like, wait, who am I paying attention to? What do I have to get out of this? Like, what's the important information I'm getting out of this scene?
Maybe it's that we just live in a time, or Star Cops takes place in a time when all information is unfiltered out there and is seemingly as important as each other.
Or maybe it's just the guy in the sound editing room like forgot to turn the knob down.
But yeah, Nathan is stuck on the Star Cops.
Well, because the commander's like, "So Brian solved the murder," and Nathan's like, yeah, because I told him to. Like in his head, he didn't say that, but I'm like thinking like, yeah, because Nathan told him to. But then the guy's like, "I really liked Brian's initiative, so I'm promoting him to your position." And Nathan's like, "Wait, what?" The guy's like, "Yeah, so if you want a job, you'll have to be a Star Cop. Otherwise, you can go work in like IT." And he's like, "Wow, wow,
you suck, Nathan." Did you get the feeling that Nathan was fairly disliked in this department? That people thought he was kind of a pain in the ass? Because I did.
I got the sense that he was like a stickler for, like I guess the opposite of a stickler for regulation. Because like I get the feeling that people disliked him because he was always like, "Don't trust the computer, go investigate anyway."
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, and also the person who killed the guy at the lake was his wife. Told you.
Well, she ordered the killing. She didn't physically like jump in.
Okay.
Yeah.
In the eyes of the law, she's still guilty.
Antique timepieces. Who knew? Who would have guessed?
Oh yeah, that was the motive for the murder.
Wasn't it that was just what I think he collected antique timepieces. As far as I understand, the motive for the murder was that the wife had amassed a certain amount of debt.
Oh, and he collected antique timepieces and she wanted to sell them to pay off the debt, I think.
Yeah. I believe that's what it was, yeah.
I don't know why that reminded me of this murder that was solved because this body washed up on a shore in England and the guy was wearing a Rolex and they identified the body because Rolex keeps like meticulous maintenance records.
Huh.
And then that was how they ended up being able to solve the murder was because they could identify him by the Rolex. I don't know why that reminded me of that.
Huh. Interesting.
Turns out the murderer was a reclusive Canadian multimillionaire who had stolen the guy's identity and was running away from prosecution in Canada and living in England and then killed this dude.
Well, that part's a lot more interesting than the first half of that story. So the things get a little bit political at the end, or I'll say a little bit more blatantly political because there were undertones for the entire thing. Nathan wonders about the true difference between the Americans and the Russians. And keep in mind that this isn't a 2027 when the Soviet Union is still around or is back. We don't know. Maybe they came back.
Putin was just like USSR 2, Electric Boogaloo.
So he wonders about the true difference because I think he goes, same means, same ends, same amount of people hurt along the way. What's the true difference between the Russians and the Americans? The commander immediately says, like, as a star cop, you need to be able to understand the difference. And Nathan says, then I guess you've chosen the wrong man for the job.
No coming back now, though.
I love that. That's such like a good Chris Boucher last line or last exchange.
It's a far cry from Blake 7 ending on some random sitcom line.
Well, that was fun, and everyone just like looks into the camera and laughs when they almost just died.
Blake, like, let's have a good laugh into the camera to play us out. I mean, that's the thing, is this whole episode is like heavily steeped in Cold War everything. Politics, propaganda. And it's interesting because it's the UK wasn't as involved in the Cold War as the US or the USSR were.
But still was.
But yeah, they were closer to the USSR, so they were like right there by that Iron Curtain. I believe it was Winston Churchill actually who coined the phrase Iron Curtain. And it's interesting seeing, I guess, the Cold War from that perspective. How much of, what's the difference between the two of them is like just witty Chris Boucher dialogue, and how much of it is Chris Boucher or whoever wrote that line making like some sort of political point about the countries as they existed in 1987.
Yeah, of course. It's actually really interesting, especially coming to this as like an American, to see a more British perspective on this, because like in the U.S., I guess the two big ways of summing up the Cold War and obviously reducing it in the process are like Russians bad, Americans good, and then now Russians are good. I don't know, but I mean, but I think more commonly you find like after World War II, we entered the age of like information warfare, and the USSR and the USA were the two biggest superpowers, constantly spying on each other, and both countries did some pretty bad and suspicious stuff to one another, and we're often in pretty precarious places. But it's interesting to see someone coming at this from like, okay, I'm not from a country that's one of these two big superpowers that could destroy everything.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because I think by 1987, the UK had developed their own atomic bomb. So I believe they had the capability, but they weren't involved in this like potentially world-ending conflict where like...
Yeah, and I think it's definitely like the conflict between the USA and the USSR and like the egos that involved and the competition that involved that like made it more scary that they were like the biggest nuclear armed countries.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's scary from an outside perspective too, and I think that's kind of what this episode is saying. Like, we're going to get caught in the crossfire if you two guys go at it. Like, who's fighting for the little guys? Not that the UK is like the little guy in the situation. But the UK is like, if the US and the USSR were to go to war, they're gonna be stuck right in the middle of that bad boy, because they're like almost right on the border of the Soviet Union at that point. Ukraine, Czechoslovakia, I guess the Slovak Republic now, the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Now those are like part of the USSR at that point, so that moves the border a lot closer to the UK than it is like today.
Yeah, that's the thing of like when people talk about World War II and like the Allies. I mean, of course, there was like some amount of just motive involved in that, but like for Britain and France, this was not so much about like, yeah, they're committing these atrocities and we have to stop them. Of course, it was about that, but it was also like, hey, like we're right here and we're about to get invaded. Like we need to stop this for our sakes. But this episode, I think, also touches or brings up here at the end something that's potentially even more scary than like nuclear warfare, which is that like this is a war based on like information control and spying.
Mm-hmm.
Just scarier to me.
You're living in it, baby. That's literally the world today. It's just all information control. You know, the White House.
Information warfare.
The White House determines what to release to paint themselves in the best light.
It's always been like that.
More so now, though, with the accelerated pace of information dispersal, though.
Absolutely.
And it's just, I think it's more prominent now because of
the internet.
Because of the internet, but also I was going to say just because like the White House right now is going through a lot of stuff. Let's just say that.
No, only 6 more years. Oh, sorry, 5.
Please
forgot
no.
we're in 2019.
Please no. Please no.
Anyway, I love this ending.
I think it's pretty good. I like it. I think my overall problem with the episode was that there was less murder investigation and more office politics.
Yeah. Again, I think maybe once, again, this is just me speculating, but maybe once this episode needed to be just one episode, they're like, all right, we need to focus on introducing the characters, especially Nathan Spring. That's my theory, I guess.
Potentially, I guess we'll see next week with episode 2.
Which I guess that moves us into our first iteration of our segment. How many of Britain's 10 actors are in this episode? So I guess we'll kind of be discussing the more main characters in this. And again, Kezzy comes back later. Mm-hmm. So we'll do her when she gets there. She's actually Australian as well. So there's that. But yeah, David Calder, of course, plays Nathan and Box.
Nice.
He actually is less well known than I thought he was. Than he thought he was. Than he thought I was. No. You know who I thought he was and who he bears kind of a resemblance to? I thought he was the guy who was trying to steal the key to time from the Ribos operation. I thought it was that guy. He looks kind of similar to him. That guy is also going to be in Children of the Stones next season.
He looked like, to me, this other bald actor who's in Man in the High Castle. Yeah, Man in the High Castle. He's one of the underground Jews living in the Nazi states of America.
Yeah, David Calder, I believe, is still acting. Not too much these days, but he's still alive, and he does have some pretty recent credits, I think. Up until Star Cops, he had been on some pretty big... in some pretty big things, although I think not in particularly big roles. So he'd been in Coronation Street. He was in James Bond, The World Is Not Enough.
Which was way off to Space Cops.
Yeah. Star Cops.
Whatever.
It's the name of the show, man.
I just keep thinking of Dylan Green's Space Cop.
Oh, God. He was in The Walking Dead. He was in the 2008 Mummy. So again, he's been in some pretty big things, though I don't think his roles in any of those were particularly big. I think Star Cops is his biggest role, though definitely not
the main character.
Yeah, though Star Cops is definitely not more well known than James Bond. We have Eric Ray Evans, who plays David Theroux. He's actually surprisingly been in pretty much nothing, and surprisingly is actually American. I thought he was just putting on a fake American accent, but I guess living in England, I guess for a couple years, you'll start kind of
developing it.
Yeah. Developing a fake American accent. So he hadn't been in much, he hadn't really been in any particularly big roles. He's mostly known for this, I found out. And he actually died in 1999. He's pretty young. I think he was in his 40s. We have Moray Watson as the commander. Now he's actually a big actor, I found out. So name like a big British show from the 60s, 70s, 80s. He's probably been in it. So he's
Blake
been
7.
No. He was in the Quatermass Experiment. He was in Avengers. He was in Z-Cars, Upstairs, Downstairs. He played Robert Muir in Black Orchid on Doctor Who. He was in Tales of the Unexpected. He was in Yes Minister. He was in Minder, which I've never heard of, but apparently is really big. And he was in a bunch of other stuff as well that I didn't note down. I just tried to note the biggest ones that I had heard of.
Wow,
He has a long acting career. He died a couple years ago, I believe, 2017, I think.
Huh. Well, that's interesting, actually.
Yeah. So those are, I think, the three big ones in here. I tried to look up Stevenson, but I couldn't find much.
Just checking IMDb. Maury Watson only in one episode, apparently, so that's great.
Yeah, I don't recall him coming back later.
Just says one episode on
That
IMDb.
is in episode 2 and 3 that I've watched.
He was also in Midsummer Murders. Watched an episode of that. And Star Cops. On Miss Marple.
Yeah, he's been in a lot of those like BBC 4TV adaptations of books.
I don't see anything on Stevenson's that I recognize, except for Star Cops.
Yeah.
Well,
you know, I didn't actually look up Lee, I just realized, but I think next episode will be a good opportunity to look up info for her based on what I know happens next episode.
Jenny Nevinson is her name, apparently. So, onto the quotes.
Yeah, there's definitely a couple good ones in this.
I think I said most of mine during the episode, actually.
I did as well, but let's just put them all here.
All right, sure. Let me scroll back a bit. I've got the damn the machines, Brian. What do you say? I've got you think someone is killing people. That wasn't really a quote I wrote down. It'll be a long, unreliable process. Life usually is. And then my favorite, nothing is private to your friendly neighborhood traffic controller.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I had the it'll be a long and unreliable process one. That was probably my favorite from the episode. Probably the most Boucher-esque line of the episode.
Boucher-esque.
I had It Won't Be Easy from the theme song. Because perhaps that describes Star Cops as a whole. It won't be easy.
That describes Inevitable.
Maybe. And I have Nathan goes, it's just a machine. Which, if you remember from Blake 7 in Duel, is a quote that Avon says.
Okay.
He goes, it's just a machine, Blake.
Okay.
In kind of that tone.
Okay.
And Nathan says almost the same thing here. Looks like Chris Boucher really likes that line.
Okay.
Or really liking his main character saying it's just a machine. Because we all know that Avon was his main character.
Yeah, all right. Okay. Well, we didn't actually mention this during the summary, and I'm surprised we didn't. That David references a movie in every other scene that he's in.
Right.
I didn't actually note down all the movies he did reference, but he references Magnificent Seven twice.
The only one I actually picked up on was Magnificent Seven.
There was another one, right, when Stevenson's got the gun on him. They're having witty banter about one of the movies that he's referencing.
Huh.
And I wish I had written it down.
I remember that, yeah.
There was at least, and then there was a part in the episode where David and Nathan had witty banter about a movie as well.
That one was also Magnificent Seven.
Yeah,
Chris
but there's
when
Nathan
fan.
is going out into the airlock, he references a different movie, and David's like, I didn't know you were. Well, he says, I didn't know you were a cinephile after the Magnificent Seven line, but when
movie buff.
When he references the other line, David's like, oh, I guess you really are a movie buff then.
Oh yeah. Yeah, Chris Boucher, as we learned from watching Blake 7, was a huge Western fan. That's why if you watch Blake 7, Avon always, and Paul Darrow was as well, so Avon always holds his Liberator gun as if it's like a revolver.
Classic Paul Darrow. Anyway, I don't have anything else to say, actually.
No, yeah.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this first episode of Inevitable, and if you'd like to email us, you can reach us at thedoctor@decorativevegetable.com. Questions, comments, concerns, angry rants, love letters, your thoughts on Star Cops. Almost said Space Cops. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify at Inevitable, a classic science fiction podcast. You can find us on YouTube at Decorative Vegetable. Be sure to leave a rating if you like the show.
Check us out on Facebook, Trust Your Doctor. Like us on Facebook. Also check us out on Twitter at TYD Podcast and follow us on Twitter. And next time we're going to be watching Conversations with the Dead. But until then, the end.